All right, we're live. So welcome to this morning's discussion on Psyfeld. Our episode is the Kiss Hello. So who would like to start? Any observed behaviors you'd like to discuss?
We can probably start with the title of the episode, like with the kiss hello. I personally was struggling to figure out the psychiatric meaning behind it. I understand that it was definitely something that Jerry found it was distressing for him because he didn't want to continue to observe that behavior. It seemed like everyone around him was adopting it. I struggled to kind of coordinate it or linked it with psychiatric diagnoses as we usually do.
So as you observed Jerry's anxiety, provide more detail. So generally speaking, if Jerry hypothetically were to have presented to a psychiatrist, what other questions would you have for Jerry, and are those questions answered in the episode?
Well, I think I would want to know if is he only having anxiety within that context or a social context, or is he worrying generally about everything and anything?
Mhm. So let's say that the answer is that well, no, it's more than just people I meet or cross paths with in my apartment, and he does provide 2 or 3 other examples in other social contexts. Next question for Jerry. Next question we would want to know.
How long is it been known?
Okay, so it's more than 6 months. And no, nothing happened 6 months ago. So I know everybody's question, which is the exact right question, right? Because you're looking for an adjustment, and more specifically, perhaps an adjustment disorder, when such an adjustment results in clinically significant distress or impairment in functioning. And let's say yes, that's why I'm coming to see you, Doc.
I'd be curious about what are the thoughts that goes through his head in those situations? Is it kind of a fear of embarrassment, a fear of scrutiny, or is it maybe more obsesses thoughts over germs, or what are those thoughts that is even that behavior?
Yeah. And what I just heard is that you actually focused on 3 hallmark qualities of 3 specific mental disorders within the anxiety disorders chapter of the DSM, right? So let's say in examining what is going on, Jerry does report a fear that, yes, it might lead to embarrassment if he is not able to escape that social situation. What might be at the top of your differential now?
Which one?
You know, we're going to get to avoidant personality as well. That's agoraphobia. That's agoraphobia. Now, on shelf exams, agoraphobia presents, for all intents and purposes, exactly like social phobia, otherwise known as social anxiety disorder. Exactly like. The fear is different. If it's the social or performance situation itself that invokes the fear, now you have social anxiety disorder. So one is fear of embarrassment and not being able to escape the social situation. The other one is the social situation itself, like performance anxiety. Right. That is a question you will definitely need to ask Jerry. That's definitely a question you need to have answered in your clinical vignette on your shelf exam.
I guess I was just confused because a lot of the times, when we get agoraphobia question, on a shelf, it's someone that's on a plane and they can't escape, or in some public setting, and that not really interpersonal, but more connected to kind of the space they're in and crowds.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the fear of not being able to escape.
Okay. So
Right.
just as long as there's that.
Right.
Okay.
Which is different than in your example of fear of flying.
Mhm.
Right. So we do need to know from our patient, from our case vignette, what the actual fear is. Let's say neither in Jerry's case, but instead, upon further questioning, upon further examination, Jerry actually demonstrates to you, he reports to you an enduring pattern of behavior that started perhaps even in adolescence. Now, what is another consideration that I heard before?
Mhm.
Yeah, avoidant, very good, right? Avoidant personality disorder. Avoidant personality disorder is that enduring pattern of behavior, because all of personalities are enduring patterns of behavior. Even personality disorders then are enduring patterns of behavior. Of course, for the disorder, clinically significant distress or impairment. And if that in fact is what's going on, if that in fact is what driven or what drove Jerry to come see you as a psychiatrist, then you're thinking perhaps a personality disorder in general, and the avoidant personality individuals who tend to avoid basically nouns, other people, places, and things, right? Things like tasks, even their own ideas can be avoided. That would count. The individual with the avoidant personality usually lives by the creed that it is better to not have loved at all than to have loved and lost. It's safer, right? Which means that the behavioral paradigm results in the enduring pattern, because that gets reinforced, right? The actual avoidance behavior gets reinforced because if they don't put themselves out there, and if they don't take risks, it is likely that they're not going to be harmed. Right? So that's what perpetuates the behavior, and that's actually grounded in basic behavioral principles.
So does it emanate from an initial event where they put themselves out there for harm, then develop this paradigm, or was it they had this kind of beginning?
It could be a seminal event. It definitely could. I think more likely it's a series of subclinical events that perhaps kindle. But in either case, there's the precipitant, but then there are the perpetuating factors themselves. That can be biopsychosocial. The psychological perpetuating factors are grounded in behaviorism in general and operant conditioning in particular. So reinforcement. Any other observations in Jerry Seinfeld and the Kiss Hell Up? And just for the record, and as a Seinfeld, I'm not sure any of this is actually applicable here, despite the fact that it does prompt discussion and review of the anxiety disorders and at least one cluster C personality disorder.
So like hypothetically, if you had the avoidant disorder, you know, at the very end, where you kind of see like everyone at the party, and he's like expects you on the outside and wants to, you know, see his way in, like how would that change the diagnosis?
I don't know if it would. I mean, isn't that a wonderful scene to remind us that people with avoidant personality disorder are actually conflicted?
Mhm.
They want to be out there, but they actually feel inferior and have difficulty putting themselves out there, whether it's in around the table and speaking up in class, or didactic, whether it's at a faculty meeting. That differs from, let's say, the schizoid personality, which also is defined through social isolation and a disconnect. But the individual with the schizoid personality, this is a cluster A personality disorder, is content in that isolation, right? So with Jerry outside looking in, what a metaphor and what a reminder to us that individuals with this condition are often conflicted, which is why there is comorbidity with anxiety and depression.
Question actually. So is it always clear whether or not someone is conflicted about it? You know, like some people might kind of lie to themselves and say, oh no, this is what I want. But in reality, they are avoidant.
Right. On standardized tests, the answer is yes, it is always clear. In real life, no. No. It is not, unfortunately. And that reminds us that these categories, and that includes the personality disorders, are artificial. We've made them up to make sense of these behaviors that tend to present, and this is all math, with these very top X number of characteristics. Any one of Y, that threshold number, will allow the clinician to rule in the personality disorder, whether it's schizoid, whether it's avoidant, whether it's any of the others. All right, any other characters other than Jerry Seinfeld in the Kiss Hell Out that you'd like to discuss this morning? Kramer, what's going on with Kramer?
So the fact that he wanted to put everyone's like picture and name up in the apartment building so that I guess foster some sort of like social connectedness, so that when people recognize each other, they would know each other's names.
Thoughts?
It's definitely odd. I mean, I guess like well intentioned, but odd, and I think we started to touch on this a little bit last week, but we were thinking that maybe we have some like statistical features.
Yeah, so we did actually perhaps consider that provisional diagnosis, the schizotypal personality disorder, yet another cluster A personality disorder. And here we are now pretty much supporting that diagnosis and yet another observed behavior from Kramer that is odd and is bizarre. Right? Yes. Again, the individual who marches to the beat of, in this case, his own drum, that results in clinically significant distress or impairment, self or others, and Kramer does get other people in trouble with this, as well as himself. We think schizotypal personality. Now, on the other hand, we talked about schizoid, right? We mentioned schizoid, social isolation. There is a disconnect with schizotypal as well, but by far the enduring quality, the enduring trait that will separate the schizotypal from the schizoid is that odd, bizarre behavior, right? And that falls, and that will always fall short of frank psychosis. So it does pose risk for future psychotic behavior, but the schizotypal personality does not demonstrate bizarre delusions or hallucinations. So while serving as a risk factor, individuals who have a schizotypal personality disorder are not psychotic. And if they do demonstrate psychosis, positive or negative symptoms, then we have to strongly consider that there's a psychotic disorder that's in play here. There's another condition, cluster A personality, that itself poses risk for future psychotic disorder. In addition to both schizotypal and the schizoid personality, what is the third and final? Cluster A personality disorder. Good. Paranoid personality disorder. The individual with a paranoid personality has a pervasive distrust or suspiciousness of others. Right? And that distrust is demonstrated probably, I think it's with 4 of a list, within a list of actual diagnostic criteria, right? So those diagnostic criteria, God bless you, are nothing more than examples of that cardinal theme, of that cardinal trait, pervasive distrust or suspiciousness, suspiciousness, if I could say it, of others. Any other observations of Kramer?
So, and I might be getting like my episode mixed up, but I'm pretty sure that this is this episode where they were commenting on how he'll always just say what's on his mind, you know, regardless of how it might like make others feel uncomfortable regarding, you know, their friends and all that.
Right. And again, and this is a good teaching point because you've heard me say this before, and this is the opportunity to remind everyone that irrespective of why an individual may present to you as a psychiatrist, our first impression with unconditional positive regard is that the behavior is normal. So there are people that just tend to speak their mind, right? Completely normal. However, when it is an enduring pattern that results in clinically significant distress or impairment, then we begin to express concern. And I don't think anyone would disagree that there are multiple examples in the 9 seasons of the situational comedy where Kramer just doing that results in significant distress to self and others. And that might be part of his cluster A personality, the disconnect that he doesn't tend to pick up on social cues. Right? So schizoid versus schizotypal, meaning that both are in play here. Any other observations, Kramer? Any other characters caught your eye? The kiss hello.
There is a friend who's in section. I don't know, I forget the character's name, but
Elaine?
Elaine's friend is the, yeah. With like the persistent hairdo, I thought was fascinating, and then like we kind of dropped her off to a couple blocks from her house, and you know, I'm not gonna drive that far, you know, they like driven to Vermont or something. I don't have a particular like kind of quick diagnosis off the top of my head, and I don't like how you're saying, is it distracting to others? Maybe it's just an isolated incident, you know, with the sense of interaction, not necessarily like the diagnosis. But I thought it was just like a very interesting, like, characterization.
Yeah, so a couple of things with Elaine, and more importantly, her friend, and I'm blanking on her name too. as
I
well,
don't
but
know.
yeah. So, the clinical significant distress has to be more than others simply not liking the way you look, liking your hair, right? But again, for the sake of didactic, let's say that there is clinically significant distress or impairment, so that allow us to actually maybe come up with a couple of teaching points. I would suggest that if that is the case, then what we are seeing is the proverbial tip of the iceberg, that this is just one manifestation of a much larger theme here. And certainly with this, 30-minute episode, I'm not really sure we're given enough information as to what might actually be going on. But what caught your eye, again, is likely just a manifestation of something that is deeper. She's certainly, again, is someone who does not appear to pick up on social cues or current trends, which again, at first glance, should be interpreted as perfectly normal. Until you're in a didactic when you have to pathologize to teach. And I'm wondering if maybe, again, first thought, initial thoughts, maybe we go down the same avenue as we do a Kramer. When we think of social disconnect, schizoid and schizotypal personality come into play. I really don't see bizarre behavior per se, so I'm not really sure that there's an eccentricity that will allow me to say it's probably schizotypal. So maybe in this case, schizoid, that disconnect, the social disconnect, rather than the schizotypal personality, where an individual's schizoid lead a hermit-like life and are perfectly comfortable in that solitude. And I don't know if her dropping Elaine off where she drops her off is indicative of that social disconnect. It could be. She just could not empathize with Elaine on how she might feel, her passenger, her friend may feel of dropping her off blocks before her apartment, only because it was more convenient for her. Again, the behavior in isolation in a vacuum, that's perfectly normal. We may not agree with our friend if they drop us off a couple of blocks, but happens. But if it's an enduring pattern of behavior, we might be onto something.
I think just in terms of enduring kind of when Elaine came to see her, saying like, oh, my arm is hurting. And she's like, oh, I'm gonna charge you to see, like, even though like her distress is caused by that. So I think it could be another example.
No, it's true. Again, missing maybe the social cue on how a physician, in this case, a physical therapist, might interact with a friend who actually is coming with a physical health complaint that the friend, in this case, the physical therapist actually, I don't say caused, but certainly contributed to significantly. Right, waive the fee if you're allowed to. If you work at a major medical center, it might be more difficult. I'm not sure she did though. Any other characters? We're coming to the bottom. Actually, we're half past the hour. No, we're not. We're quarter past the hour.
I guess like the other kind of like narrative thread that was throughout the episode was like the conflict between Jerry's like mom and his uncle over like the $50 that was like owed and never I guess was paid, and then Jerry's dad was like compounding the interest that would be due and how much money that he would owe her at this point, and then all because the grandmother was like I guess she had dementia and she thought it was like the current year, but he owes his sister money basically.
Yep. So what do you think is going on here? I mean, there's multiple characters in play here. There's Jerry's uncle, there's Jerry's father, Jerry's grandmother. We'll reserve grandma for last. I think she has a fairly straightforward diagnosis, but what about either Uncle Leo or Jerry's father? I think upon first observation, Jerry's father calculating the interest that has been compounded certainly would be consistent with obsessive compulsive personality. And he's literally on a calculator figuring out how much his brother-in-law owes him. And then you could see with the dialogue with his wife, that's Leo's sister, Jerry's mother, that there might be some family conflict here that is a little bit more deep-rooted than just someone forgetting or not giving half the money to their sibling. And so, and that level of discord is interesting between Mr. and Mrs. Psyfeld, because I would suggest that it did not begin during this episode. It probably began when they first met, first got married, which means that Jerry, at the age of 2 and 3 and 4, probably observed this. If an individual has such a chaotic home environment, where dad is hyper-focused on issues like this, and that interaction, that dynamic between mom and dad, is that chaotic? I don't know what word you want to, because this is not the only time it happens, of course, right? We have 9 seasons of the Freudian slip, the Seinfelds acting and interacting like this. Maybe we actually have uncovered the origin, the etiology of Jerry's obsessive compulsive personality traits. Maybe that young child thinks that his home environment is a bit out of control when he sees this types of behavior, when he sees this type of interaction and dynamic model, and might recognize that they can actually provide more order and control individually, hence developing what are often referred to as type A personality traits, or as per the American Psychiatric Association, obsessive compulsive personality traits. Because Jerry has fairly straightforward OCPD, perfectionist, right? But that perfectionism, that need for control, comes from someplace. And it's usually early childhood experiences, and boy, did we get a glimpse of that here. Don't know what's going on with Leo. He's certainly a character as well. No doubt that he loves Jerry. There's some sibling rivalry, sure. But again, beyond quote unquote normalcy, I really don't know what to make of Uncle Leo. There's a lot there to unpack. Just doesn't give us a shelf, I think, centric, easy, single best answer. Nana, what's dementia? What is major neurocognitive disorder? AKA dementia.
It's like a clinically significant cognitive decline, typically with a more gradual and insidious onset, that is generally not considered reversible.
Unless you're dealing with reversible dementias, which is a related topic, which kind of operates in a middle ground between delirium and major neurocognitive disorder, the AKA reversible dementias. Right? When there is a clear etiology that's discovered and correction of it improves cognitive outcomes, but perhaps not the confusion of the waxing and waning that would otherwise be defined by the delirium. Right? Yeah, well, we'll talk about the multiple cognitive domains, and the reason why I wanted to talk about Nana last is because it actually does link to our discussion this afternoon on the Babadook. So believe it or not, there's a connection between the Babadook and the Kiss Hell Up, right? So we'll definitely pick up the conversation at noon. That's Night's Watch, where our focus discussion will be on the Babadook, and I'm sure that major neurocognitive disorder will be part of that discussion. We'll see everybody back then. For those actually on the other side of Zoom, we're going to log right back on for morning rounds. See you then.